in. It is Big Ten Today. Great to have you with us today. We have a loaded show for you. Dave Wannstedt, Pat Forde, Andy Katz. If that does not keep you around, I do not know what will. But we start with the awards. We've got the defensive awards today, the offensive awards announced in this same time slot tomorrow. So let's get right to them. They are our big story, and we will start you with the individual awards. And here they are. Aidan Hutchinson winning the Nagurski-Woodson Defensive Player of the Year, as well as the Smith-Brown Defensive Lineman of the Year. School record 13 sacks and counting for the Wolverine star. Wisconsin's Leo Chenal is the Butkus-Fitzgerald Linebacker of the Year, second in the Big Ten in tackles for loss. Iowa's Riley Moss, who has missed the last few games with an injury, still named to the Tatum-Woodson Defensive Back of the Year spot. Jake Moody, Jordan Stout, Charlie Jones named Specialists of the Year. As for the All-Big Ten defensive teams, the coaches and media agreeing on most of the picks. They had all the same D linemen. Hutchinson along with Haskell Garrett, Arnold Ebiketie, and George Karlaftis. Chenal, David Ojabo, first-teamers for both the coaches and the media. Jack Campbell, a first-teamer for the media. Jack Sanborn getting the nod from the coaches. You have two Hawkeyes in the secondary, Moss and Dane Belton, along with Jaquan Brisker. Michigan's Dax Hill on the coaches' first team, while Illinois' Kirby Joseph was the media's selection. And we are joined now by the defensive lineman and defensive player of the year, Aidan Hutchinson of the University of Michigan, today's big interview. Aidan, congratulations. I mean, this is no great surprise, I would say, for those of us who have been watching you dominate the Big Ten this year. But still, what does it mean to win awards like this?
Yeah, it's, I have so much gratitude right now and really so much appreciation. It's nice to be, all that hard work has finally paid off. And, none of this would be possible, without my teammates doing their thing, without, Coach Mack coming in and really changing the scheme here at Michigan. So it's really a culmination of a lot of people that don't get this recognition but really deserve it. But, I'm just truly blessed and really, truly grateful.
One of the really cool things about this Defensive Lineman of the Year award is that your father won it in 1992. So what does it mean to join him on this list?
Yeah, it's pretty darn cool. I mean, hopefully we'll be sharing a couple more awards in the future that he got. But yeah, it's so cool. It's my senior year. He got it his fifth year, senior year, and our paths are kind of crossing, at this point, and we're doing a lot of the same things, that we've done. I broke his sack record in that last game against Ohio State. So, there's a lot of that going on with my dad right now. So it's all fun. It's all really cool and very, very cool to see.
You were talking about the Ohio State game. Let's shift gears a little bit here off of the awards. Have you come down off of Cloud 9 yet? And what have these last few days been like for you and on campus?
Yeah, I'd say today I'm almost back level. A win like that, it's something that it takes a couple days to really just understand it in your mind and really believe it that we did it. Something that we've been trying to do for years. So Ann Arbor was crazy. And, Coach Harbaugh finally did it. I mean, just really a breath of fresh air all around the board, at the University of Michigan.
Is there a moment from Saturday that will particularly stick with you? Like that's kind of when you think about it, when someone says, tell me about that game, that not just now, but maybe years from now, that will be the moment?
I just think the coolest part of that game was, one, being the atmosphere at the Big House, my last game as a senior, and the snow was coming down too. I mean, it was one of the first time it snowed a whole year in Michigan, and it was just the perfect weather for the greatest rivalry in football, and it just added a little bit of intensity, and man, the crowd was so in it. Everything about that game was so great, and something that I'll never forget for a very long time.
So the challenge now is to refocus and to get ready for Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. How difficult is it to kind of put Ohio State behind you and get ready for the Hawkeyes?
It's not too difficult to refocus. There's not one person on that team who's got a ring. No senior does, nobody does. So we are all just itching to get something, on our finger, to put that ring on our finger. So yes, we beat Ohio State, but we're on to bigger and better things now, and we want a Big Ten championship ring.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had you on last month, and we were talking about the fact that you grew up around the program. Obviously, as we said, your dad played there, and you grew up going to games. You were born in 2000. Michigan last won a Big Ten championship in 2004. So I'm guessing that really wasn't part of your conscious lifetime, Michigan winning the Big Ten. So what would it mean, essentially, for the first time since you've been aware of it, for Michigan to win a Big Ten championship and for you to be the focal point or one of the focal points of that team?
Yeah, you said it. We haven't won it since 2004. I mean, that is a long time, and I think this Big Ten championship has been a long time coming, and every single guy on our team wants this so bad, and I know we're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. So that starts with a great week of preparation and just great execution in that game to get the job done.
Iowa has struggled at times offensively, but what do you see when you watch them on film?
Yeah, just watching film for the first time yesterday. They're a really big zone team. They got very fast, athletic offensive linemen that really can move well downfield. And if we want to win that game, we got to be able to stop their zone scheme and really get them to pass the ball. That's really, I'd say it's the main thing we have to do is stop the run. And I believe if we can do that, we'll have a lot of success on Saturday.
Last thing I want to ask you, there are still a lot of awards out there. You won a couple today. There is some Heisman buzz around you right now. What is it like to hear your name in that conversation?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You see it, places on social media, but I'm pretty locked in right now. We have a Big Ten championship to win, so really that's priority number one. But again, it's cool seeing that buzz. But man, I want to put a ring on my finger on Saturday, or by the end of Saturday.
Well, Aidan Hutchinson, we look forward to seeing you in Indianapolis coming up here this weekend. Congratulations on all your success this year.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
The voters for the All Big Ten Awards are not the only ones impressed with Hutchinson's performance this weekend. Pro Football Focus noting he has 15 or had 15 QB pressures in that game, the most since they started charting such things 7 years ago, and saying he is now their number one draft prospect. Jim Harbaugh made a case for just that at his news conference yesterday, and at least one outlet agrees with him. As promised, Dave Wannstedt joining me now. And Coach, you spent time in the college game. You spent time in the pro game. Give me a sense for what you see when you watch Aidan Hutchinson.
Well, that first stat that we were talking about, 15 pressures. Sometimes a pressure can be almost better than a sack because that's when your incompletions come, but that's when your interceptions come also. So that's vital. Some people look at that and might not think of how important that is. Great pass rushers. The first thing you have to have is you got to have talent, and the talent that they talk about, it's not how big, how fast, it's how quick the God-given instincts that you have of just that first step, we call it. And right. If you watch him when the ball's moved, I mean, he's unbelievably first step quickness. And then you got to have, on top of that, you got to be able to give great effort. And I used to always evaluate guys and say, okay, this guy's got talent. Now, he's going to get blocked some. How is his second effort and his third effort? And he's off the chart on that category. And then you get into the technique. That was always the last thing for me. So when you look at the technique, how does he use his hands? Does he have a counter move? All these things that you see Aidan do you know, and it probably goes back to his father. And that's going to mean something. When you're evaluating, you're saying, hey, what's his pedigree? What's his brand? Well, his dad did it. So this kid is not going to be intimidated. If I draft him and he walks into an NFL camp, it's not going to be the first time that he's heard that or been exposed to that and be intimidated. So, you know, he checks all the boxes. There's no question, and you'd love to have him on your team.
Well, this team checked all the boxes on Saturday, and we talked a lot in the build-up to this game about Ohio State's explosion and the big plays. They were averaging about 2 plays of 40 yards or longer per game going in. They got none against Michigan. It was the Wolverines who were the explosive team, as it turned out. What did Michigan do to negate that from Ohio State?
Well, they rushed. Majority of the time, it was a 4-man rush. And all they wanted to do was basically make the ball come out on time. And you say, why didn't Ohio State come up with that 50 and 60-yard big pass plays that they've been doing all year? It's because the ball was either going to come out, or we talk about those 15 pressures just with one player. Well, that means that he's right in the quarterback's face. So they forced him to get the ball out quick. They mixed in a little bit of 5-man pressure, played a little bit of man, but for the most part, they were playing a 2-deep shell, and they were keeping people deep, and they were going to say, throw it underneath, and we're going to get steady pressure on you. It was a great game plan. I mean, they never panicked once, and that was the difference defensively. They mixed it up a little bit. But at the end of the day, they said, you 4 guys up front, Aidan, starting with you, we got to have pressure if we can keep the big plays from happening. That's what they did.
Yeah, it was really impressive to watch, just the notion on both lines of scrimmage, the way that Michigan dominated the ball, right? Well, they were the only team that could run the ball. And they had more than 230 more rushing yards than Ohio State did.
Well, John Madden texted Jim Harbaugh after the game. I was listening to Jim yesterday, and John Madden texted him and said, it's been years since I've seen line play like I saw with Michigan today. And, I think that speaks volumes for the job that these guys did. Then you see the results, but, they were ready to play. There's no question about that. And you know what? I always would evaluate a team, including my own teams. How did we start the game? How did we come out of the box? And Michigan comes out of the box, right down the field and scores. Right. They come out the second half. Okay, now they come out at halftime. What was the conversation, the excitement, everything going on at halftime? Adjustments. And they come out the second half, 81 yards, and take it down on their opening drive and
after
score.
After a 3-and-out from Ohio State.
After a 3-and-out. So, I mean,
they were totally dialed in.
That sends a message to me right now, like, whoa, if I'm on the other side, if I'm Ryan Day, I guarantee you Ryan was thinking, these guys came to play today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now what do you see when you look at this matchup with Iowa in the championship game?
Well, what did we say about 4 months ago? The tortoise and the hare, you gave me the... And I said, this is when they were early on winning, top 5 team. Right. They would start so slow and fall behind and then come up with some turnovers on defense and run the ball, and then Kurt Ferentz would get his guys and they would close out and win. And we were kidding about it. Well, the last 2 weeks, they're back to the tortoise and the hare. They fell behind last week, right? They were behind the week before, double digits in the fourth quarter, and came from behind and won. How did they do it? With turnovers. And that's going to be the key to Iowa. I mean, right now, Iowa is plus 13 on the turnover margin as a team. And you hate to say, boy, because I would say it. We can't count on getting turnovers. Or if I'm playing, we can't turn that's team turning the ball over.
Certainly not Michigan. Michigan doesn't turn it over.
No, they're plus 6. You're right. So they're doing a good job. But the reality is, for Iowa to win, that's part of their DNA. They've got to come up with the turnovers and find a way to run the ball. And I tell you what, Aidan made that point. He says Iowa is a zone blocking team. And when you're zone blocking, that means that you're not pulling people. You're not doing a lot of trapping inside. And it's very tough for a defense. When I would be facing a zone team, it's very tough for a defense to get in the backfield and get those negative plays because nobody's pulling. There's not space. Right. They're just going shoulder to shoulder. So Iowa, no one's better than Kurt Ferentz with the offensive line. You know, he understands what he's got to do to prevent negative plays. It's going to be real interesting to see how that unfolds and how Michigan counters that.
And also fascinated to see kind of what we were talking about with Aidan, how they come down off the high, right? I mean, that's the thing that you really have to guard against.
Yeah, and now he said all the right things there.
Yes,
God, that was going to be one of my points there, and he ruined it in the interview.
It seems like they're focused. And again, when you have that championship and you haven't had it in 17 years, you've got incentive.
When he starts talking about getting the ring, he ruined my whole talk.
Well, we'll get more from Wani coming up a little bit later in the show. All Big Ten second teams on defense. P.J. Musafir making it despite his injury issues. Speaks to how good he was before getting hurt. You see Micah McFadden on there, third in the Big Ten in tackles for loss. Chris Bergen led the nation in tackles per game. He is on the list as well. Iowa's Matt Hankins making it 3 players from that Hawkeye secondary on the first or second team. Congratulations to all. And congratulations to Michigan State's Mel Tucker, named both the Hayes Schembechler and Dave McClain Coach of the Year. So he won both the media and coaches' votes. Incredible turnaround. Took a team that won just 2 games last season, got to 10 regular season wins, just the 7th time they've ever done that in East Lansing. 4th time in 5 years the same coaches won both awards. Paul Chryst, Pat Fitzgerald, Tom Allen, the other 3 to do it. And some coaching news. Brent Pry is leaving Penn State. The defensive coordinator named the new head coach at Virginia Tech, so there will be some turnover on James Franklin's staff. That is big news in college football, but I would say it is not the biggest news in the college football coaching carousel. It has been a crazy couple of days. Pat Forde joining us for his weekly visit, and Pat, Lincoln Riley going from Oklahoma to USC, and then last night, I mean, the absolute shocker of Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame while they are still very much in the playoff hunt, and going to LSU, just crazy times. And I want to say first, I was wrong last week because I said these schools showed their hands, they fired these coaches early, and they backed themselves up against the wall, and all they've done is get extensions for a lot of these other candidates. I was wrong. I mean, I guess you just throw a ton of money at people, and you can get people to move.
Yeah, eventually there's a price that you can get people. But, I mean, talk about unprecedented, Dave. I mean, the head coach at Oklahoma just doesn't leave for another college job. And the head coach at Notre Dame just doesn't leave for another college job. Yet they both did within 48 hours. I mean, just a wild turns of events. And, yes, money played a big factor. And I think looking at the landscape and deciding where can I win a national championship? Because we're talking with Lincoln Riley, we're talking with Brian Kelly, 2 very established, very successful guys who have gotten teams to the playoff, but then haven't gotten to the next level. They've been blown out in their playoff semifinals. They haven't gotten to a championship game. They haven't won a championship. I think Lincoln Riley looked and said, Oklahoma and the SEC, no thank you. I would rather go to USC and have all the advantages there. And then Brian Kelly, I think, looked and saw his team being beaten by superior athletes at Alabama, superior athletes at Clemson, says I can get just a notch better at LSU and compete with them there.
Yeah, that's what's crazy is that both of these guys have been there. I mean, they have been on the precipice of winning national championships. But again, to your point, hasn't gone well in those situations. And you know, from Lincoln Riley's point of view, he's already recruiting so well in Southern California. Why not just go to Southern California when those guys are on your doorstep and you don't have to sell them on going to Norman? We know about the challenges at Notre Dame. It is a place that really prides itself on having good student athletes and having the football players really kind of mix with the student body at large. So it does seem like there are some barriers. While they may not be massive barriers, they're certainly not barriers that prevent you from competing, but perhaps barriers that prevent you from winning, at least in their eyes.
Yeah, and that's it. I think what we could be looking at, even in an era where we are hopefully expanding the playoff, is almost a contracting of the number of programs that actually can win the playoff. I mean, you're talking the Alabama, Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson are the only ones in the playoff era who have won a championship. that may be it. I mean, if you're willing to leave a Notre Dame for an LSU, that tells me you think that there is such a finite number of schools that can win it that if you get that opportunity, you go. Now, I mean, I have significant problems with Brian Kelly doing this the way he did at the time he did with a team that very well could be in the playoff by Sunday. But clearly he felt like he had hit the ceiling at Notre Dame, and there was still somewhere above that to go where you could win a title.
Would have liked to have been a fly on the wall in that 7 a.m. team meeting that he texted everyone about last night. That must have been fun, dragging yourself out of bed for that. That would have been fascinating. What about Big Ten impact? We just saw Brent Pry leaving for Virginia Tech, which certainly is a blow, no doubt, for James Franklin, but they have a great tradition of defense at Penn State. I'm sure he will find someone really good. More broadly now, as the musical chairs start spinning, do you see the Big Ten impacted in any meaningful way?
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens with Notre Dame. Is it possible that they could be interested in somebody like Pat Fitzgerald, who's had success at a similar academic institution? Maybe. But for the most part, I think the Big Ten, as we discussed last week, could emerge from this as one of the winners because Mel Tucker got that contract. James Franklin got his. And it's funny, last week James Franklin's contract looked big. This week it's like, just another contract. But, I do think that the coaching stability is going to be there for the Big Ten in ways that maybe it looked like it wasn't going to be. So if you're looking for which conferences are coming out in the better end of what should be a wild carousel, we're certainly not done yet. Maybe some more things happen. Jeff Brom could be somebody who comes into play in places. But I think that for the most part, the Big Ten is going to be relatively stable.
Yeah, it feels like the Fitzgerald one would be a really tough sell at Notre Dame, given that he's finished in last place 2 of the last 3 years. They certainly are not striking when the iron is hot there. Had it probably his worst team this year. Oh, let's talk about the games on the field, right? I mean, the coaching stuff's great, but there are actually college football games, and there were some great ones this weekend. And so now we spin it ahead with Michigan becoming the Big Ten team that has a shot at a national championship. Georgia has been the team all year that has been kind of the gold standard that everyone looks at and says, who can beat them? Can Michigan beat them?
I think they can. I'm not saying they will, and if they played, I would pick Georgia right now. Let's see how they look here in the next round of games. But in terms of how you are built to compete against Georgia, gosh, Michigan's got some nice things. For the most part, look, you start with the fact if you could slow down Ohio State's running game, you could probably slow down Georgia's, although we'll see. And then you are sending Aidan Hutchinson and David Ojabo after a quarterback who's underrated in Stetson Bennett, but still is a 5'11" quarterback, and you get in his face, and all of a sudden maybe Stetson Bennett looks a little bit more like the guy last year who was a former walk-on than he has this year when he's played extremely well. So I think you could perhaps at least pull Georgia into a low-scoring game and see what happens. See if you can create some turnovers. Nobody in college football is moving the ball successfully, consistently against Georgia, and that would include Michigan. Hassan Haskins, great running back. I'm sorry, he isn't rushing for 100 yards against that defense. Their passing game, sneaky good in some areas. I'm sorry, they're not hitting big plays against Georgia. That is a historically great defense. But if you want to talk about being able to match up and pull out a 14-13 kind of game, I'm not saying it couldn't happen.
Yeah, no doubt. Weren't many people giving them a chance last week, and they manhandled Ohio State, as we just talked about with Coach Wanstead. More generally, kind of bigger picture, what does this win mean for Michigan's program?
Absolutely huge, Dave. It's the one thing they haven't had. They needed it very badly. And this was an Ohio State team everybody thought would beat them significantly again. And for that to not happen and then turn around and just pound them, to beat them convincingly, to beat them in the trenches, to run them over, to shut them down, I just think it gives Jim Harbaugh all the credibility that he had perhaps been leaking since 2016. It gives the program all the confidence it didn't have. It sends you out on the recruiting trail with a ton of energy when you're recruiting probably a lot of the same players. I just think it is an absolute game changer and difference maker. And to use Jim Harbaugh's phrase, it feels like a beginning. They're kind of back to that beginning when they got Harbaugh and everybody said, hey, we can co-compete for a national title. Now I think that's very much Michigan football again.
No doubt. And, of course, it also sends signals very clearly to Ohio State that you're not just going to be able to roll through this league anymore. The team that had won the title 4 straight years, that had this amazing streak of consecutive Big Ten wins going. Ryan Day had yet to lose a Big Ten game. And now all of a sudden, seemingly overnight, the equation changes here, Pat. So what does it mean for Ohio State? Again, you're not sounding alarms. I mean, this is a team that still is nationally elite, but all of a sudden you got to compete with Michigan again. So what happens here for the Buckeyes?
Sure do. No, I mean, it's not an alarm, but it is probably a bit of a wake-up call. Can't be complacent. They've got to get better defensively, frankly. We saw against Oregon early in the year. We saw against Michigan late in the year. Not able to stop the run, not able to stop a relatively balanced attack, getting pushed around. If anything, I think they're a little bit soft on defense. They've got to get better in those areas. Got a lot of young players in those positions that are probably going to continue to mature and get better, but they've got to get a little bit tougher, I think, and not just count on outscoring teams and throwing the ball all over the place. On both sides of the line of scrimmage, I think they've got to become a little bit better in the trenches. 2
years removed from being first in the nation in total defense, and they are a long way from that right now. A new playoff rankings coming out tonight. How do you expect it to play out?
I expect Georgia 1, Michigan 2. If it were me, I'd put Cincinnati 3 and Alabama 4. The committee may go the other way on that. And then of great interest, who's 5? Is it Notre Dame or is it Oklahoma State? Because I think Alabama's going to lose to Georgia, and there's going to be a spot in that top 4 open up. And then is it the team that doesn't have a coach, or is it Oklahoma State if they can win the Big 12 championship? I mean, that's where the idea of this is just so weird and so preposterous. And if you're the committee, Dave, I think you have to look at this and say to Notre Dame, we have to judge you, just the way they do it in basketball, on the team that you will bring to the tournament. And that team you are bringing to the tournament does not have your head coach. I think if all things are equal, it might cost Notre Dame a chance to get in the playoff if they're 11-1 and Oklahoma State is 12-1.
Wow, that is really fascinating. The notion of whether or not, in absence of a head coach, look, he's a big part of their success, right? There's a reason that LSU's beating down the door to pay him all this money to head to Baton Rouge to be their coach. So that is fascinating as to whether or not they are the same team. And, of course, you don't get the extra data point to evaluate them without Brian Kelly. Yep. So you just have to speculate as to what they would be without him at the helm. Man, these are crazy times in college football. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes out as you do every single week. Thanks so much, Pat. So it really cranks up tonight and tomorrow. There are 6 games tonight. Let's look at the schedule here. Indiana and Syracuse, 87 title game rematch there, pretty good. Number 2, Purdue is getting Florida State. Number 1, Duke going to Ohio State. Let's talk through all of these games. There are a few, of course, that are the bigger ones, and let's start there. Purdue's got its highest ranking since 1988. They are welcoming Florida State. The Noles are missing a couple of key pieces, I know, including both of their big men. So that's challenging. That's not really a situation you want to go into against Purdue. But what are you watching here?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be more about Purdue. I mean, this is not the same Florida State team that we normally see from Leonard Hamilton. Won't be the same Florida State team I think we'll see toward the end of the season. They got run out of the gym against Florida in the second half earlier this season. So I fully expect Purdue to sort of run away with this, which is not easy to do against Florida State, but because of their inside game, which I just don't think a team like this Florida State team can touch. But I think this will be a good primer for Friday night because Iowa will come in to Mackey with a lot of confidence, certainly, and Purdue needs to sort of shift toward the Big Ten. But this Purdue team easily could have been won. Quick sidebar, usually, one team's on the road, one team's at home in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, Big Ten ACC, whatever. It's too bad that they did not match Duke and Purdue because this is a year where they could have because Duke's on the road and Purdue's at home. Just my own little soapbox.
Okay, so instead Duke is going to Ohio State. They are the number 1 team. Ohio State's been a little bit weird. I mean, the guard play just isn't there. E.J. Liddell is playing at a phenomenal level. He has just been incredible. But what do you think of this matchup from Ohio State's point of view?
So I was texting with Chris Holtman about how you're going to handle Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams, who had a phenomenal game against Gonzaga. He's sort of the underappreciated big man for Duke because Banchero takes up so much oxygen. They're going to run E.J. Liddell and Kyle Young at Banchero. And basically, Zach Edey, they're sort of going to have to keep Mark Williams off the glass as much as possible. But inside's not the issue, I don't think. And Holtman said that they're going to have to watch the transition game because Wendell Moore from Duke is sort of playing kind of like the way Quinn Cook did for Duke, that experienced player, not as heralded, and yet is getting them where they need to be. He was great against Gonzaga, too. That puts a lot of pressure on Michi Johnson. This is where Ohio State really misses Dwayne Washington.
Yeah.
You know, they did not expect him to leave. And this is what happens a lot of times. And remember, the draft was later. You weren't going to replace Dwayne Washington in the transfer portal in July, in August. And he was one of the last people to make his decision. And they're feeling the effects of Washington leaving. And that's where I think this game potentially could be won for Ohio State if they can somehow, perimeter-wise, be in check.
They need a number 2 scorer to emerge, no question about it. Let's run through a few of these other ones. Indiana's still perfect. They're going to Syracuse. Syracuse already lost 3 times. They lost by 15 to Colgate. How good is IU? I mean, this is a really good test for them in terms of stepping up in competition a bit and going on the road, but Syracuse isn't great.
No, and Indiana, I'm still high on Indiana, but they needed every one of TJD's 43 points to beat Marshall.
Right.
They need more help. I mean, Xavier Johnson has played well. I mean, they got to get more production out of Miller Kopp. I mean, he came there to be a scorer. There's no question that Trace Jackson-Davis is looking like an All-American right now, but they're going to need, you talk about a second scorer for Ohio State, they need someone else to be consistent. They can beat Syracuse. There's no question about it, and this would be a good road win for them.
If Colgate can beat Syracuse,
yes,
Indiana should be able to beat Syracuse. How about Minnesota? They are unbeaten under Ben Johnson. It has not been a great schedule, admittedly, to this point, and it still probably isn't a great schedule after tonight because Pitt is just flat out not very good.
Yeah, Pitt is off to a horrendous start. They didn't expect the other Champagny, you know, they got the brothers, one at St. John's, one at Pitt. He ends up going pro. That hurt them. This is a game Minnesota can win. And they won a tournament earlier this season. They've got momentum. You know, they beat Princeton in overtime to win it, but hey, win's a win. I think they go with some momentum, and they are, quote, a little bit more surprising.
Pitt has lost to Citadel and UMBC, among others. So
at home,
not having a great year. Still no Chase Audige for Northwestern. They go to Wake. I think we still get a chance to see a little bit here these next couple games how good Northwestern is.
I think it's a critical game for Northwestern because it is winnable on the road for the Wildcats. And yes, you know, Chris told me that Audige is out. He's not played yet, and he was one of the better returning scorers. They're hoping he'll play against Maryland this weekend. They don't want to rush it. But look, this is an opportunity for them. I think that what they showed in New York, yes, they lost to Providence, but their second half, they were down big, they came back, they ended up losing by 5, and then what they did is they won a game they should win. They beat Georgia. Georgia isn't very good, but those are games Northwestern in the past has lost. This is a winnable road game for them to get some momentum going against Maryland.
Very quickly on Rutgers, 3 straight losses on last-second shots. What do you do now?
You've got to find someone else besides Amorier, Cliff Amorier, Baker, and Harper. They really are feeling the effects in the transfer portal. I just don't think they replaced the Miles Johnson, Montez Mathis, and Jacob Young. They are just so thin. This is a game, you know, rematch, by the way. Rutgers-Clemson, right?
Yep.
Yeah, rematch from the NCAA tournament. So
not shooting the ball well.
No.
Got to figure out a way to hit threes. Let's get into the ACC Big Ten Challenge games for Wednesday. They include Michigan State hosting Louisville, Wisconsin back in the rankings. They get Georgia Tech, Michigan going to North Carolina, 6 games in all. Let's run through a few of these. Again, they're still a day away, but let's start with Michigan State. A couple nice wins in Atlantis, beating Loyola of Chicago and UConn, and then just kind of getting blown out in the second half by Baylor after starting the game fairly well. Where do you see the Spartans right now?
I feel pretty good about them, and I think Tom Izzo does as well. I mean, they kind of ran out of gas, and that was a bad matchup for them on that day against Baylor. But the fact that Marcus Bingham, who had the game-winning shot in the first game, if I'm remembering correctly, on the alley-oop, having him play well inside is huge for them because there's been so much potential from him. Their point guard play is better. It still has to come along. And, you know, Hall and Brown and Christie, they're only going to get better. So I think if I'm Michigan State, I'm feeling pretty good heading into this week and beyond.
Agree with you. I mean, they've shown they can compete with kind of the bottom half of the top 25. And now the question is, can you get better and compete with that top half?
And Tom
Izzo
Izzo teams usually do.
They generally do. Yes, that is a rule of thumb. What about Michigan going to North Carolina? They have been a little bit disappointing at times as they try to integrate their new pieces. What do you make of them against the Tar Heels?
Well, North Carolina as well has been disappointing
Yes.
to some degree. So this is a real critical game, I think, for both schools to get some momentum into their respective conference play. For Michigan, obviously, what we care about, I mean, Caleb Houston, a lot of hype. And maybe that's unfair at times to these freshmen because sometimes there's a natural progression for a freshman. Not everyone's going to be Paulo Banchero,
right.
Who's this year's sort of Zion Williamson coming off out of the gate and playing great. And so I expect Houston to play better later. But, Devontae Jones, once again, there is a learning curve coming from Coastal Carolina to Big Ten level play. They got lucky. We've talked about this. Mike Smith from Columbia, really lucky to have him just step right in. Years ago, Duncan Robinson. That doesn't happen normally when you go up. And so let's give it time. But I think it's a critical game to see where they stand after the defensive lapses they had against Arizona. That's the big thing.
Yes, and that more on the interior. Carolina more of a perimeter team, but it'll be interesting to watch that game. Wisconsin is turning into a really good story. I mean, they won Maui, albeit not on Maui. Johnny Davis is turning into one of the better players in the country. I mean, has really emerged. So what do you think of the Badgers here against Georgia Tech?
So I was wrong. I watched them against Providence. I know they didn't have Johnny Davis, but their bigs and everyone else just did not play well at all in that game. I was there. I went to the game against Houston. They had a big lead, 20-point lead against the Cougars, withstood the surge from Houston, and then won that game. I thought that was a season-changing game for them because Houston is good,
right,
especially defensively. Brad Davison, I like him, don't like him. He is a leader within that team. I saw it with my own eyes, and he picks his spots when to make a big shot, and now has seeded basically Johnny Davis. It is your team, and he has accepted that. He was phenomenal last week. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. He dropped 30 on Houston.
And they need a leader because they're very young, but this team seems very connected, which last year's team did not seem.
No, not at all.
So real credit to them. One more I want to talk about, Maryland and Virginia Tech. We've seen the Terps a little uneven. The loss to George Mason. They played a really close game with Hofstra. Louisville beat them reasonably handily. What do you make of where the Terps are right now?
Well, I mean, they've got to get Fats Russell more consistent. Kudus Wahab, has not been as good as I think everyone projected. Defensively, they've had lapses. This is a key game for them at home against Virginia Tech team that is pretty good. They've got one of the better players in the ACC in Keve Aluma. So this is going to be a good barometer test for Maryland because right after this, I think they've got a pretty good Northwestern team coming in.
Yeah, Virginia Tech, nice surprise last year. It'll be interesting to see whether they're able to continue that under Mike Young. Good stuff.